A guten Erev Shabbos. In some ways, thankfully, we have advanced as a society and as a culture. We are more sensitive, we're more aware, more cognizant of the consequences of what we do, whether it's to the planet or to each other, to other people. Sometimes we let things go off the rails a little bit. It is hard to keep the balance, but it is a worthwhile project. In fact, keeping our balance might be one of the most worthwhile projects there is. I happen to like animals, and I'm glad that there are animal rights organizations in the world that help strays find homes, rescue animals that aren't cared for properly, and so on. Of course, this sensitivity and care can go too far sometimes, to the extreme. Perfect example of this a few times over the past couple of years with one of the most famous animal rights groups, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. They are against animal testing of pharmaceuticals and cosmetics on animals, which is a fine sentiment. Although in Jewish law we recognize a sort of hierarchy and we would be allowed to use animals responsibly to save human lives, even in potential, by transplanting heart valves or testing medications. Testing mascara may be another story. But PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment, doesn't draw such fine distinctions. So, first time was I think about 20 years ago, they protested to the PLO, who were using donkeys to carry explosives to kill Israelis. Now, quite notably, they did not protest the use of explosives to kill Israelis, just the animals to carry them. That's what upset them. This appropriately lowered their stock in the eyes of the thinking world. Then they went on further to equate industrial farming with concentration camps, which didn't do their cause much good either, so you reap what you sow. But the idea of responsible and compassionate treatment of animals really is a Torah value and goes back to our earliest sources. It's a mitzvah unto itself, and schar mitzvah mitzvah, a mitzvah is its own merit. On the one hand, at the same time, we might imagine that being sensitive to animals makes us that much more sensitive to human life, even if in other cultural frames of reference this is not always the case. We have fully 12% of all the mitzvahs in the Torah in our portion this week, Ki Seitzei. There are 74 mitzvahs in this week's Sedra, so you have to listen closely and count on your fingers, make sure you get them all. One of them is specifically to be attentive and sensitive to an animal's needs. It says that when you're threshing with an ox, you are not allowed to put a muzzle on it. Lo sachsam shor b'dishay. I'm not a farmer. I don't know how threshing is done nowadays. Maybe somebody will tell me on Shabbos at the Kiddush. But before machinery, they would put the grain on a threshing floor, a goren, and have big heavy animals stomp on the grain with their hooves and break the husks away from the kernels. Now imagine how an ox thinks, if you can. Here he has to stomp on these delicious looking grains all day, but he's not allowed to nosh on even one of them because the mean farmers have put a muzzle on him. The Torah says be sensitive to that. Do not muzzle your ox while he's working. If he wants to nosh while he's getting his steps in for the day, let him nibble a little bit. What's the harm? Now, here's an interesting note from Halacha that takes into account an important conversation about intentionality. Shulchan Aruch Harav says that if a person unintentionally muzzles their ox during threshing, it's not a sin. Only if one muzzles the threshing ox with intention can it be considered a transgression. Fascinating. If a person does not have intention to sin or doesn't even know that the thing that they're doing is wrong, it's not considered a sin. What about the principle of ignorance of the law is no excuse? Jefferson said it, others said it, they probably got it from Parshas Vayikra where it says that, V'lo yada v'ashem v'nasa v'aynei. But here we're saying that a sin without intentionality or even recognition is not really a sin. What's up with that? When we learned Tractate Brachos a couple of years ago and we studied Kriyas Shema, the mitzvah of reciting the Shema in the evening and the morning, we got into the question of mitzvahs tzarichos kavana. Do mitzvahs require your intention to do them? Example, You're learning along, Parshas Veschanan a couple of weeks ago, chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, and you say out loud as you're reading, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, in the course of your study. Did you just fulfill the mitzvah of Shema? Or does it only work if you have the intention, not of study, but of fulfilling the mitzvah? A number of sources argue that you can fulfill a mitzvah without intent, without meaning to. Even if you're forced to do a mitzvah, it's still a mitzvah. And yet, a sin can only be such when a person intends it as such. What's going on here? Let's think for a minute about what does a mitzvah accomplish? Not just a good deed, that's for sure, but it's not satisfying enough, is it? A mitzvah takes an item, if we're talking about a physical mitzvah, like a coin that you give to tzedakah, parchment, you write a mezuzah on, a lulav and esrog, a menorah, and it attaches that physical thing to godliness, and us too, while we're doing the mitzvah. A sin just takes something a little bit further away from holiness. So why must there be intention for a sin, and this great accomplishment of bringing something closer or attaching it to the realm of godliness can be done even without intention, without meaning to, without even recognizing that you're doing it? Here's why. When we wake up in the morning, the first thing we say, even before you go to shul, even before we wash our hands, is Modeh ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam. Look in your siddur if you have it, page 2. Shechazarta bi nishmasi b'chemla rabba munasecha. I acknowledge that you have returned my soul to me with compassion, living an eternal King. You have abundant faith in me. That's what we say when we wake up. First thing we wake up in the morning. Before anything else, we connect ourselves to our source of life, to God Almighty. Which means that whatever we do, our intention for the day starts out with good things, holy things, godly things. We're even articulating in words our connection to God. Anything we do throughout the day comes under that heading. It's on that setting, whether we're thinking about it with intention or not at the particular moment. Better to be focused, but it's a rare person who can sustain absolute focus for a few minutes, let alone hours, let alone all day. Sins, transgressions, the opposite of holiness. Who's even thinking about those things? We've already made our mission statement for the day clear. I'm connected to you, God. I'm grateful to you, God, and you have great faith in me. What can go wrong? Even when sometimes things do lose their focus, they go in a direction that we hope they wouldn't. We're involved in things that we wish we weren't or we know we shouldn't be. Our original intention from the first moment of our day is powerful enough to bring us back on track. That's teshuvah, and that's where we are. We asked this question about Rosh Hashanah and intentionality with respect to the shofar a few years back, when we learned Tractate Rosh Hashanah in our Tuesday morning class. We asked what happens if a person walks down the street and passes a shul on Rosh Hashanah while the shofar is being sounded. If the person hears the shofar, did they fulfill the mitzvah of shofar? We learned arguments for each possibility. But since we'll all be here, please God, in 3 weeks' time from tomorrow, from Sunday when we sound the shofar, because on Shabbos, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we'll fulfill the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah by not sounding the shofar. So when we're here in 3 weeks and we recite Psalms beforehand and we say the brachas before and we hear a nice drasha before, these questions of intention or not won't even apply to us. We'll have intention. We'll have focused ourselves on accepting and proclaiming God's sovereignty over all the world. And on the second day, with the sound of the shofar, we'll connect all that came before to the final redemption. But what about now? What about these days that we're in the middle of, between now and Rosh Hashanah? These are days, precious days of unusual and uncommon closeness and accessibility to God. On our reader board outside, we have the cryptic message that the King is in the field in the month of Elul. This is taken from what I'm told is the sole parable in Likutei Torah, addressing the question as to why in the whole month of Elul is not a holiday, like Chol HaMoed at least. In the Sephardic world, they're already saying Slichas for a week already. They begin at Rosh Chodesh Elul, last week, in recognition that God's 13 attributes of mercy are revealed in this period, this 40 days, for all of Elul through Yom Kippur. We Ashkenazim will get on board in a few weeks, but the closeness, the openness to connection is extraordinarily present right now. It says there that it's like a king. When he's enthroned in his palace, only a few special people can approach, and only by invitation, and only at specific times, and following specific protocols. That's what the days of awe are like, the high holy days. But when the king is on the way to the palace, passing through the fields on the way, all the people approach in their ordinary clothes, and the king receives them with a smiling, welcoming countenance. That's where we are in Elul. The king is in the field, close to us, on the way to the palace, but right now, close and accessible to us. And we are received with a warm and welcoming reception. So in these weeks that we still have to prepare ourselves, let's gather up the most intention that we can summon. Let's refine our hearts and our minds and our singing voices to pray when the time comes with full and open hearts. Let's mend all the relationships and the burnt bridges that have to be rebuilt and repaired among ourselves, and even do our best to heal the hurts that are within us, whatever that takes. And may this new year that will soon be upon us be one of renewed strength, renewed joy, renewed health, and renewed peace for all of us, among all of us, and within each and every one of us. Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova Umetuka. A happy and healthy and sweet new year.